There are decisions people make in the span of a few minutes, but live with the consequences of for the rest of their lives. Minh signed the contract for house number 47 in exactly 7 minutes. He was 34 that year, recently promoted to lead engineer at a software company in the city. An, his wife, was 7 months pregnant, her belly large enough that she could no longer bend down to tie her own shoes. They needed a bigger house, a place where the child about to be born would have a room of their own, a small yard, an address the whole family could attach their name to. For Minh, that meant something heavier than most people would understand. He had grown up in an orphanage on the outskirts of the city. He didn't know who his parents were, didn't know where he came from, had no address to call his own, except the orphanage he left at 18 with a small bag and a document recording the day they had found him on a street corner before he was even 2 years old. Minh didn't talk about it often, not because it didn't hurt, but because he didn't know what to call that hurt. So he put it somewhere very deep, closed it off, and kept moving forward. But some things, no matter how carefully stored, always find a way to show through. For Minh, it showed here. Every time he thought about family, about the child coming soon, he felt something tighten in his chest, heavy and warm at once, like holding something you'd lost for so long you no longer dared believe it was real. House number 47 was more beautiful than every other house they'd looked at in their price range. 2 floors, 3 bedrooms, a front yard wide enough for a child to run in someday. A quiet neighborhood, trees lining both sides of the street, neighbors who appeared older and not the type to gather loudly. The asking price was nearly 30% below the market rate. The agent explained it calmly, with the tone of someone who had prepared the answer in advance. The previous owner had left abruptly many years ago, leaving the house unoccupied. The bank had repossessed it after a long period, and it was now being sold through foreclosure, hence the price. An took Minh's hand and looked at him. Minh looked around one more time, at the large room that would become the nursery, at the front yard with its old starfruit tree, its branches thick and heavy with leaves. Then he signed. The moving day was full of the kind of warmth that comes with new beginnings. Friends arrived to help, laughter echoing through still empty rooms, the scrape of cardboard boxes across old wooden floors. An directing who should carry what with the authority of someone who had been mentally arranging this house for weeks. Minh watched his wife in the middle of their friends and felt something warm up in his chest in a way he wasn't used to. This was his home, his wife's home, the home of the child about to arrive. For the first time in his life, he had an address that truly belonged to him. That evening, after everyone had gone, Minh stayed to install the security camera system. He had ordered it 2 weeks earlier. Top-of-the-line smart home cameras, remote monitoring through his phone, automatic motion detection recording, footage uploaded to cloud storage. He needed to know An was safe when he wasn't home. Needed to be able to see her at any moment. It was the kind of worry that comes from having lived alone too long, from not knowing any other way to protect the people you love, except to always be able to see them. He finished installing the last camera just before 11 at night, checked each connection, reviewed the view from every angle on his phone. Kitchen, living room, hallway, staircase, front yard. Everything normal, everything his. He turned off the lights and went upstairs. Before climbing the stairs, he paused at the kitchen doorway and looked in. The hallway light cast a pale glow across the kitchen floor. In the middle of the kitchen tiles, there was a discolored patch, rectangular in shape, roughly 1 meter long and half a meter wide. The floor there was darker, slightly damp, sitting just a fraction lower than the surrounding tile. Minh had noticed it when they first viewed the house. The contractor who came to inspect had said it was probably old settling, nothing to worry about. He looked at it for a moment, then went to bed. The first week in house number 47 passed the way first weeks in new houses usually do. They were unfamiliar sounds at night that the body hadn't yet learned to recognize as ordinary. The wood contracting after a warm day, wind through a window seal not yet fully weatherproofed, water in the upstairs pipes occasionally carrying a sound through the walls that resembled footsteps. Minh worked remotely from the second-floor study, screen bright from morning to evening. An stayed home, reading, watching films, tidying in the slow way of someone carrying a belly too large to bend quickly. Everything was normal. Everything was beginning. On the 5th day, An mentioned a dream over breakfast. She used the voice of someone recounting something unimportant, the voice people use when they actually want to say more than they're letting on. Last night, I dreamed there was someone in the kitchen. Minh looked up from his newspaper. Standing at the sink washing vegetables, An continued. Her back was to me. I called out and she didn't turn around. She just stopped, lowered her head. Then I woke up. Minh looked at his wife. An didn't seem frightened, only like someone trying to find a way to explain something. Probably because you've been thinking a lot about the baby coming, Minh said. Dreaming about home, about the kitchen. Completely normal. An nodded. Maybe. Then both of them finished breakfast and returned to their own days. That night, Minh stayed up later than usual, finishing a report due the following morning. Around 2 a.m, he got up and went downstairs to get water. The house was dark and quiet, with the particular silence of old houses late at night, a silence thicker than usual, as though the rooms were holding a breath not yet exhaled. Minh didn't notice that. He opened the fridge, took out the water jug, poured a glass. Then he smelled it. Faint, just drifting through the air of the dark kitchen. The smell of boiled vegetables. Not a strong smell, not the smell of a pot just lifted from the stove, but a thin, warm smell, the kind that lingers in a kitchen that has cooked all day and only recently gone quiet. Minh stood still in the dark kitchen, glass in hand, letting his nose confirm what he was sensing. Then he set the glass down and opened the lid of the large pot on the stove. Empty. He opened every other pot, checked the microwave, checked the bin. Nothing. Nothing had been cooked in this kitchen since lunch. Minh stood in the middle of the dark kitchen, the hallway light casting its pale glow across the floor, looking down at the discolored patch in the center of the tiles. He looked at it for a moment. Then he turned off the kitchen light, went back upstairs, lay down beside An, who was already asleep. He didn't tell her about the smell, not because he thought it was important, but because he didn't yet know what it meant. Into the second week, the rectangular damp patch on the kitchen floor became more visible. Not wider, just darker, deeper, as though something beneath it was slowly pressing upward through each layer of tile. Minh called a repairman. The repairman was an older man, around 60, who came with a small hammer and a long metal rod for testing. He tapped around the damp area, listened to the sound it returned, then crouched down and carefully lifted one tile at the edge of the patch. Under the tile was old mortar. Under the mortar was soil. He dug down about 15 centimeters. The soil there was deep black, completely different from the reddish-brown of ordinary foundation earth. And cold, far colder than it should have been. Cold in the way of ground that had not been touched by sunlight in a very long time. The repairman stood up, dusted off his hands, spoke in the flat tone of someone who had seen many old houses. "This soil has been dug up and refilled at some point," he said. "Common in old houses. Probably someone dug here before for a water channel or pipe repair, and didn't compact it well when they filled it back. "I'll patch it up, nothing to worry about." Minh stood watching the repairman fill the gap back in. Cement filling the seams, the surface smoothed flat. 10 minutes later, nothing visible to the naked eye. But Minh knew. Under that new layer of cement, the soil was still there, black and cold, and previously disturbed by hands he didn't know the name of. 3 days after the patch, at 3 in the morning, An shook Minh awake. Her voice wasn't panicked, just quiet and alert, in the way of someone who has been lying there listening to something alone for a while before deciding to wake someone else. "Do you hear that? There's a child crying." Minh lay still, eyes open in the dark, listening. Silence. No crying. No sound at all except the slow turn of the ceiling fan and the distant rumble of a truck on the main road. "You were dreaming," he said, voice still half asleep. "Lie back down." An lay down, but she didn't close her eyes. She lay looking up at the dark ceiling, listening to the silence of the house around her, trying to find again the sound she had just heard. Nothing. She asked herself. The crying had been clear, not the sound of a dream. It had come from below, from under the floor, small and distant but distinct, the crying of a very young child. But then she thought of her belly, of the child inside it, and she told herself, maybe I'm hearing things. Maybe after all these months of pregnancy, after so many nights imagining the first cry of a child, her mind had begun to produce the sounds she had been waiting for too long. The next morning, An didn't mention it to Minh. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she didn't yet know what she was afraid of. On Thursday afternoon of the second week, An went out to the yard to hang laundry. The neighbor at house number 49 was sitting on her front porch, sorting through vegetables. White hair pinned neatly back, a slight curve to her spine, her hands moving steadily through the greens with the ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times. The two women noticed each other through the low fence. The older woman smiled first. "How long have you been moved in?" "About 2 weeks now," An said, smiling back with a slight nod. The woman nodded and continued sorting her vegetables. They talked across the fence the way new neighbors do, questions that don't require long answers. "How many months along? What does your husband do? Where did you move from?" Then the old woman stopped sorting. She looked across the fence toward house number 47, not looking at the house itself, but at something within it she couldn't see. Her voice dropped slightly. "Have you noticed anything unusual?" An looked up. "Unusual how?" The woman shook her head and returned to her vegetables. "Nothing, I'm just asking. New place, unfamiliar surroundings, people tend to have vivid dreams. And you're pregnant, so you startle more easily." Then she stood up, carried her bowl of vegetables inside, and was gone. An stood in the yard, looking after her. On a small iron hook nailed into the wall beside the front door of house number 49, there hung an old palm leaf hat. The hat had yellowed with age, its brim worn soft at the edges, its chin strap tied carefully even though the strap itself had long since faded. An looked at that hat and felt something strange, as though she had seen it somewhere before. Not seen with her eyes exactly, but in some other way, vaguer, less certain, the kind of half-memory the mind produces and then can't quite confirm as real. An stood looking at it a moment longer, then went inside. That night, she dreamed again. The woman was still standing in the kitchen, back to An, washing vegetables. This time, An didn't call out. She just stood at the kitchen doorway and watched. And this time, The woman began to turn around, slowly, very slowly. An saw her shoulder, saw the black hair falling halfway down her back, saw the face beginning to come into view. Then she woke up. She sat up sharply in the dark bedroom, heart racing, hands pressing instinctively to her belly. Beside her, Minh was still sleeping, breathing evenly. An sat like that for a long time, waiting for her heart to slow, looking toward the window where the streetlight pressed in through the curtains as a thin, pale strip across the floor. The next morning, when An opened the front door, she looked across at the hook on the wall of house number 49. The old palm leaf hat was gone. In its place, on the empty hook, hung a length of red thread, thin, tied into a simple knot, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. An stood looking at the thread. She didn't understand why the old woman had put the hat away, didn't understand why the red thread was now hanging there. But something in her, something not rational, something deeper than rational, recognized that the old neighbor was doing something meaningful that she didn't yet have the language to understand. Wednesday night of the third week, at 2:17 in the morning, Minh's phone buzzed on the nightstand. A notification from the camera app. Motion detected in the kitchen area. Minh opened his eyes, looked at the glowing screen in the dark. He sat up carefully so as not to wake An, opened the app, navigated to the cloud-stored footage. The kitchen camera feed appeared on screen. Timestamp, 2:14:33. He watched the clip in the dark of the bedroom, the phone screen lighting his face alone. Dark kitchen, no one there, no movement visible to the naked eye. He almost closed the app, assuming a false trigger, the kind insects or small animals sometimes set off. Then he saw it. At the 23rd second of the clip, the camera's recognition algorithm activated on its own. A small blue square appeared in the right corner of the frame, flagging a section of darkness near the kitchen wall. The camera was registering a person standing there. Minh zoomed in. In the corner of the kitchen where the camera was flagging, there was no person. Only shadow and wall and part of the wooden kitchen shelf. But in that darkness, the noise grain of the night vision camera, those small white speckles that are meaningless in any low-light image, were clustering in a way that wasn't random. They were clustering into the shape of a person standing still. Faint, indistinct, explainable as imagination finding a human shape in random digital noise. But the shape was upright, arms at its sides, face turned toward the rectangular damp patch in the center of the kitchen floor. Minh watched the clip multiple times. Then he went back through it frame by frame, tracking when the shape appeared and when it was gone. It appeared at second 15. By second 47, it was no longer there. 32 seconds. Minh sat with the phone in his hand in the dark bedroom until the sky outside began to lighten. The next morning, after An finished breakfast and went to the bedroom to read, he went down to the kitchen alone. He stood at the position the camera had flagged, looking at the wall. Nothing unusual, just an old wall painted pale yellow, the paint peeling in small patches here and there to reveal the plaster underneath. He looked more carefully at the largest area of peeling paint, right at eye level. Under the paint, the plaster there was slightly raised, uneven compared to the surrounding surface, as though something had been pressed into the wall from outside and then plastered over. Minh pressed gently against that spot. The plaster crumbled under his finger, falling in small, dry fragments to the floor. Inside the small gap that opened in the wall, something was tucked in, wrapped in a piece of old fabric stiffened and brittle with age. He took it out and unwrapped it.
Inside were two things: a small silver earring, the simple round stud type that young women often wore, the metal tarnished with age but still intact, and a small piece of paper folded many times, yellowed and brittle enough that Minh had to open it with great care to avoid tearing it. On the paper, pencil writing nearly faded but still partially legible. "If anyone finds this, children beneath." The rest was too faded to read. Minh stood in the middle of the kitchen, the silver earring and the piece of paper in his hand. Morning light came through the kitchen window, laying a pale stripe across the floor. He looked at that stripe of light, at the new cement patch in the center of the kitchen floor, at the small silver earring in his palm. Then he sat down on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, and began to think.
Minh was an IT engineer, which meant he didn't search the way ordinary people searched. He didn't type the house address into a search engine and wait for results to appear. He traced through land registry databases, tracked the history of ownership transfers, cross-referenced the previous owner's name against business registration records, followed tax identification numbers back through associated transactions. Tedious work, requiring patience and knowing where to look. He did it over 2 nights after An had gone to sleep. The previous owner of house number 47 was named Duke. He had run a transport business, registering 3 different companies over time, all using this address as the principal place of business. In 2009, his name disappeared from all business registration records. No bankruptcy filing, no dissolution notice, just gone. Minh searched further. In a court database, a 2009 criminal investigation into a child trafficking network had been suspended for insufficient evidence. Among the persons of interest listed in that investigation was the name Duke, with the address of house number 47. The investigation was suspended. Duke had fled before he could be arrested. Minh read slowly through each page of the documents, eyes pausing at each name. On the 7th page, he found a name mentioned exactly once and never again in the entire file. Nguyen Thi Lieu, domestic worker. Address, house number 47. Missing person report, March 2008. He searched her name across every database he could access. No follow-up investigation after the missing person report. No record of being found. No record confirming permanent disappearance. Nothing at all. Nguyen Thi Lieu appeared once in one page of an investigation document, noted as missing, and then vanished from every record as though she had never existed. Minh leaned back in his chair and looked up at the ceiling. From the second-floor study, he heard the sound of An shifting in her sleep, the faint creak of the mattress springs, then silence again. He looked back at the screen. Nguyen Thi Lieu, missing since March 2008, 1 year before the owner fled. He thought of the small silver earring in the desk drawer beside him, thought of the piece of paper, thought of the patch of new cement on the kitchen floor downstairs. He sat for a long time in the quiet of the late night, not typing another key, just sitting, knowing. Minh hadn't yet told Anne what he had found. He wanted to be more certain before speaking. Certain of what exactly, he couldn't say, only that he needed more time to place what he knew into the right order before bringing it to someone else. That evening, Anne went out to the corner store to buy some fruit. Walking past house number 49, she looked up at the hook on the door. The palm leaf hat had returned, hanging on the hook as though it had never been gone. Anne stopped, then knocked. Mrs. Chin opened the door, looked at Anne for a moment, and showed no surprise, as though she had been expecting this. "Come in."
The two women sat in the old woman's small living room, drinking thick green tea, the evening outside beginning to darken. The yellow lamplight inside was warm, but there was something in that warmth that wasn't entirely comfortable. Mrs. Chin looked at Anne's belly for a moment, then looked out the window toward house number 47, then down at the cup of tea in her hand. Then she began to speak. "Liu was a good person," Mrs. Chin said. Her voice was slow, as though drawing each word up from somewhere very deep, somewhere that had been sealed shut for a long time. "She used to bring vegetables for the neighbors, homegrown, clean, every season without fail. I never met anyone that kind." She paused, drank a sip of tea. Outside the window, the sound of traffic on the main road drifted in, faint and distant, the sound of a city continuing on outside this small room. One day, I heard shouting from inside that house, very loud. Then, silence. Then I didn't see Liu anymore. The owner said she'd gone back to her hometown, but she'd left her hat at my house. That last day I saw her. Mrs. Chin looked up at the hook near the front door, where the palm leaf hat was hanging. "People going home don't leave their hat behind," she said. The air in the room changed. Not through any sound or movement, but as though the air had grown heavier, denser, the way the air changes before rain when the pressure drops and the clouds haven't yet appeared. Mrs. Chin stood up and went into the back room. A moment later she returned carrying the palm leaf hat. She placed it on the table between them, gently, the way you set down something fragile. "Nearly 20 years I have kept this," she said. "I was afraid. I have children, grandchildren. I didn't dare ask questions, didn't dare tell anyone." She looked at Anne. "The day you moved in, I saw your belly. I was worried, because I know Liu is still looking." Anne asked quietly, "Looking for what?" Mrs. Chin looked down at the hat on the table. "Looking for the children," she said. "Not to harm them. She would never harm children. But I was afraid she might not be able to tell the difference anymore. When someone has been in the ground too long, sometimes they forget clearly what they're looking for and where. That's why I tied the red thread on that hook, to protect the spirit of the child in your belly." Anne sat still. Her hand rested on her stomach, palm pressing softly against the place where her child was lying inside. That night, at 2 a.m, Anne shook Minh awake again. This time, she didn't need to say anything. Both of them heard it. Footsteps in the kitchen. Not heavy footsteps. The sound of thin-soled slippers on tile, light and slow, each step deliberate, moving from the kitchen doorway toward the new cement patch in the center of the floor. Then stopping. Silence for about 10 seconds. Then a different sound began. Water dripping onto tile. Tick. Steady. Tick. From a place both of them knew had no water source. Tick. Tick. Tick.
Minh took a flashlight and went down to the kitchen alone. An sat on the bed, arms wrapped around a pillow, listening to his footsteps descend the stairs. The kitchen was dark. Minh's flashlight swept across each corner of the room. No one there. Only the cabinets, the counter, the pot on the gas stove, and the tile floor stretching out beneath him. The dripping sound had stopped, but when he shone the flashlight down at the kitchen floor, the new cement patch in the center was wet. Not wet from water flowing down from above. Wet in the way of something pressing upward from below,
through the microscopic fractures between new cement and old tile, leaving dark threads of moisture spreading outward from the center, like the veins of a leaf. Minh crouched down, brought the flashlight close to the floor, and saw it. In the center of the wet area, on the surface of the damp tile, was the shape of a child's hand. Not an ordinary handprint. Not the kind left when someone presses their hand down onto a surface from above, but the opposite, as though a hand had been pressed upward from below, pushing through soil, pushing through cement, leaving the impression of itself on the wet tile from the other side. 5 fingers spread open, small. The hand of a child not yet 3 years old. Minh looked at that handprint for a long time. The kitchen was quiet around him. Only the sound of his own breathing, slow and deliberate, the breathing of someone trying not to do anything sudden. Then from directly behind him, very faint, very close, warm enough that he felt it on the skin of his neck, a breath touched him. Minh spun around. No one there. Only the shadow of the kitchen corner and the smell of something he had first noticed 2 weeks ago. The smell of boiled vegetables. But not faint and warm as it had been before. This time it was mixed with something else. The smell of cold, damp earth. The smell of deep ground that light has never reached. Thick enough that Minh almost heard it rather than smelled it. He looked up at the kitchen counter. The small silver earring was lying there. He was certain he had left it in the desk drawer in the second-floor study before going to bed. He stood still in the dark kitchen, flashlight in hand, the light aimed at the small silver earring on the counter. Then he picked the earring up and put it in his pajama pocket, turned off the flashlight, went back upstairs. He didn't say anything to An that night. He lay down beside her, looked up at the ceiling in the dark, listened to her even breathing and the sounds of the night outside the window. In his mind, the pieces were slowly finding their places. Nguyen Thi Lieu, domestic worker, missing since 2008. The earring in the wall, the piece of paper. A child's handprint pressing up from beneath the earth. He knew what he had to do next. He just wasn't sure yet whether he had the courage to do it.
The first layer. Anne's dream on Friday night. This time the woman in the kitchen turned around completely. Anne saw her face. Young, thin, high cheekbones, long black hair loose at both sides. Eyes not looking at Anne, but looking down at the kitchen floor, the eyes of someone thinking of something beneath rather than of what was standing before them. The woman pointed down at the ground, said nothing. Just pointed down, looked down, stood still. Then she opened her mouth. Anne waited for a sound, but no sound came. Only a smell. The smell of cold, damp earth flooding suddenly into the dream, thick enough that Anne felt as though she were breathing inside the ground rather than standing in her own kitchen. Then she woke up, sat bolt upright, hands pressing instinctively to her belly. The second layer. Minh recognizes her. The next morning, Minh searched through cold case forums, places where amateur investigators collected and shared information about unresolved cases. He found an old thread from 2012 about the 2009 trafficking investigation. Someone had posted an old photograph reproduced from the case documents, showing people connected to the case. One of those photographs was of Nguyen Thi Lieu. Minh looked at the photograph. Young face, thin, high cheekbones, long black hair. Exactly as Anne had described the woman from her dreams. Minh sat looking at that photograph for a long time. Something kept him from looking away. Not fear,
Not recognition exactly, but something deep inside him, deeper than memory, deeper than conscious thought, was responding to that face in a way he couldn't explain, as though his body already knew what his mind had not yet been told. The third layer. Mrs. Chin tells the rest. Minh went to Mrs. Chin's house that afternoon alone. He sat down without preamble. "Do you know what happened to Lieu while she was here?" Mrs. Chin looked at him for a moment. Then she told him the part she hadn't told Anne. "Lieu knew," Mrs. Chin said. "She knew what the owner was doing. I didn't know the details. I only knew she used to look after children in that house, small children whose parents I never saw, who came and went without anyone seeming to know. One day she came to my house and gave me the hat to keep for her. Her eyes looked different that day, like someone who knows they won't be needing that hat anymore." Mrs. Chin looked toward the window. 2 days later came the shouting, then silence. Then the owner said she'd gone home to her family. I didn't believe it, but I was afraid. I had grandchildren in my house. I said nothing. She paused, her voice dropping until it was barely more than breath. "For nearly 20 years, I kept that hat, and I could never bring myself to look at it." Minh sat quietly. Then he asked one last question. "Do you know of the children who passed through that house, whether any of them were taken away before Lieu disappeared?" Mrs. Chin looked at him, looked for a long time, in the way of someone who has realized something and isn't yet sure whether to say it. "Yes," she finally said. "I remember one, very small still. Lieu used to carry him out to the yard in the mornings to get some sun. Then one day the baby wasn't there anymore. I asked, and Lieu said the baby had been returned to his family. She said it with a smile, but the smile didn't look like a happy smile. It looked like the smile of someone who has just done something they know they'll have to pay for." Minh drove home through an afternoon that had turned to long golden light across the road. His hands were on the wheel, his eyes were forward, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He thought about the orphanage, about the document recording the day they found him on a street corner before he was 2 years old, nothing on him but the clothes he was wearing. About that date, about 1 week after the day Lieu was reported missing.
Minh called the police the next morning. He laid out everything he had found, showed them the earring and the piece of paper, gave them the names, the dates, the connections he had traced. The police arrived that afternoon. The excavation began when the light had already started to angle, casting long shadows across the kitchen tile. No one talked much. Only the sound of shovels meeting earth, of soil being lifted and turned into buckets, of the breathing of people doing heavy work in a confined space. When the first layer of soil was turned over, a smell rose up. Not the smell of rot or decay, but the smell of cold earth mixed with the faint smell of decomposed vegetable matter, thin as smoke, thin as a memory. The smell of someone who had been here a long time and had carried with her into the ground the one thing most connected to who she had been while she was alive. The smell of vegetables brought to neighbors. Minh stood at the kitchen doorway looking in. An stood behind him, his hand holding hers, neither of them speaking. They found the remains, and alongside them, wrapped in an old, yellowed plastic bag placed carefully nearby, were small pieces of fabric in different colors. School uniforms, children's clothing, each piece folded separately and tied with a small white thread. Evidence. She had kept them all the time she was alive, and when she knew she wouldn't be able to keep them any longer, she'd taken them down with her, waiting for the day someone would find them.
The detective crouched over the plastic bag. These are records of the children who passed through this house. Minh stood watching as they carried each thing out of the hole beneath his kitchen floor. In his chest, there was something that wasn't sadness and wasn't fear, but felt like standing in a heavy rain and knowing that when it finally stopped, everything would be different. Not necessarily better, just different.
The police reopened the old investigation from 2009. From the evidence Lieu had left in the plastic bag, from the carefully folded pieces of fabric tied with white thread, they gradually pieced together the names and identifying details of the children who had passed through house number 47 before being taken away. The ringleader had died abroad many years earlier. There would be no clean ending, no day in court, no gavel coming down in a sentencing room. But there were names. There were dates of birth. There were identifying details recorded in Lieu's handwriting on small pieces of paper kept inside a plastic bag. A week after the excavation, the detective in charge of the case called Minh and asked him to come to the office to review some files in case he recognized anyone among those connected to the case. Minh went alone. He didn't tell An. He sat in the detective's small office and went through the pages of files placed in front of him. Names, photographs, dates of birth, identifying features. He turned each page slowly, eyes pausing at each entry. On the 11th page, he stopped. Not a full name, only a given name, no family name. Below it, a date of birth, and a small handwritten note in Lieu's script. Hidden, safe, don't look here. That date of birth was Minh's date of birth. He sat looking at that page without moving. The detective sitting across from him watched him. Do you have your original birth certificate? Minh thought of the document in the desk drawer at home from his days in the orphanage. The paper recording the day they found him on a street corner before he was 2, nothing on him but his clothes. The date he was found, 1 week after the day Lieu was reported missing. Minh said nothing for a very long time. The office was quiet. Outside the window, the sounds of the city drifted in, faint and steady. Then he understood. Lieu hadn't called a stranger into that house. She hadn't chosen randomly which family would buy it. Not because of the price, not because of the size, not because of the quiet neighborhood or the old star fruit tree in the yard. She had waited 20 years in the ground, waiting for the only child she had hidden away, the child she had traded her own life to get out before she was killed, to find his way back. Minh sat in the small office of the police station and wept. For the first time since leaving the orphanage at 18, he wept. Not from fear, not from grief, but because for the first time in 34 years, he knew. Not where he had come from, but that someone had chosen to make sure he was still here. Minh and An moved out of house number 47 3 weeks later, 2 weeks before the due date. On the last night in the house, after all the furniture had been packed and moved, the two of them stood together in the empty kitchen. The smell of damp earth was gone. No more footsteps, no more dripping, no more feeling of air holding its breath. The kitchen was just a kitchen, empty and still, and light in the way of a place that has just set down a weight it had been carrying far too long. An placed the old palm leaf hat on the kitchen counter. She lit a small incense stick and pressed it into an empty tin can she had set aside for this. Smoke curled up, drifted toward the window, dissolved into the night air outside. An watched the smoke for a moment, said nothing. Minh stood behind his wife, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Outside the kitchen window,
The old starfruit tree in the yard stood in the glow of the streetlight, its leaves pale in the dark, swaying gently when the night wind passed through. 3 years later, on a September morning, Minh sat eating breakfast, scrolling through the news on his phone. A small article in the local paper, not a major story, only a few lines in the society section. After more than 20 years apart, a local family has been reunited with a daughter who went missing in 1998, thanks to information from the investigation into house number 47. Minh read the article twice, then set his phone down. His daughter was sitting beside him eating breakfast, 3 years old, hair in 2 small braids, using her spoon to scoop congee with the seriousness of someone who considers this the most important task of the morning. He looked at her for a moment. The palm leaf hat was placed inside a small wooden box on the living room shelf, beside the family photographs. His daughter sometimes pointed to that box and asked, "Daddy, whose hat is that?" Minh always answered with the same words. "It belongs to someone very brave, sweetheart." The little girl would usually nod, seem satisfied with that answer, then go back to the important business of being 3 years old. Minh didn't know when she would ask more. Ask how brave, ask what happened, ask where that person is now. When she did, he would tell her. All of it. For now, he just sat watching his daughter eat breakfast in the morning light coming through the window, and felt something warm up in his chest in the way he had grown familiar with since the day he signed the contract for house number 47. Something heavy and warm at once. Like holding something you had lost for so long, you no longer dared believe it was real. Sometimes the dead don't come back to harm the living. They come back because something remains unfinished. A child who doesn't know where they came from. A truth no one has yet stood up to tell. Liu had waited in the ground for 16 years, not for revenge, not to settle a debt, but for the child she had saved to find his way home. And when Minh signed that contract in 7 minutes on an April morning, he thought he was choosing a house. He didn't know that someone had already chosen him, long before.